In the heart of Denmark, a country where the mere idea of Islam was as distant as the deserts of Arabia, an unprecedented event shook the quiet streets and disrupted the airwaves. The announcement that 3 Jewish girls had converted to Islam sent shockwaves through the nation. It wasn't just a personal decision, it was a declaration that challenged societal norms and traditions, leaving an entire country in disbelief. Julia, the eldest of the 3, stood in the living room of her family's home. The air was thick with tension as she prepared to reveal the truth that had changed her life. Her father sat rigidly in his chair, his stern face etched with authority. Her mother hovered near the kitchen, pretending to busy herself but clearly hanging on to every word. Taking a deep breath, Julia said, "I have accepted Islam as my faith." The words landed like a thunderclap. Her father's expression darkened instantly. He rose from his chair, towering over her. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. Julia's hands trembled, but her voice remained firm. "I believe in one God, Allah, and I have embraced Islam. It is the truth I have been searching for." Her father's hand came down hard across her face, the sound reverberating through the room. "How dare you?" he shouted, his face red with anger. "You've brought shame to this family. How can you abandon your heritage, your faith, everything we've taught you?" Julia's cheek stung, but she held her ground. "I have not abandoned the truth. I have found it. Islam has given me peace, something I have never known before." Her father's eyes burned with rage. "If you do not renounce this madness, you will lose everything. Your inheritance, your place in this family. All of it. Do you hear me?" Julia met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "I understand, but I will not leave Islam. My soul is not for sale." Her father's lips curled into a sneer. "If you are so eager to throw away your life, then so be it. I will disinherit you. Everything that was yours will go to your younger sister." At that moment, Julia's younger sister, Hannah, stepped into the room. Draped over her head was a scarf, modest yet striking in its symbolism. Her father froze, his eyes widening in shock. "It won't make any difference," Hannah said, her voice steady but soft, "because I too have accepted Islam." The room plunged into an even deeper silence. Their father stumbled backward, as if the weight of her words had physically struck him. "Not you too," he whispered, his voice breaking. "This cannot be happening." Hannah stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "I believe in the same God as Julia, and I will not hide it." Their father's fury reignited. "Both of you have disgraced this family," he roared. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead." Their mother, who had been silently observing, began to cry. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "You were raised to honor your family and your faith. What has gotten into you?" Julia's voice softened, but her conviction remained firm. "Mama, this isn't about dishonor. It's about finding the truth. Islam has opened my heart in ways I can't explain. It's not a rejection of you. It's a fulfillment of something I didn't know I needed." Her mother turned away, unable to look at her daughters. The sense of betrayal was too overwhelming. News of their conversion did not stay confined to their household. Within days, it became the subject of gossip and speculation, spreading like wildfire through their community. Soon it reached the local media, where it was sensationalized and dissected by every news outlet in Denmark. 3 Jewish girls convert to Islam, a nation in shock, blared the headlines. The public reaction was swift and divisive. Social media buzzed with heated debates. Some applauded the girls for their courage and independence, while others condemned them as rebellious or brainwashed. It became a national conversation, with everyone from religious leaders to political figures weighing in. Julia, Hannah, and their close friend Leah, the third girl who had also embraced Islam, found themselves thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. The scrutiny was intense, but they leaned on each other for support. "Do you regret it?" Leah asked one evening as they gathered in Julia's small bedroom. Her voice was hesitant, as though she feared the answer. Julia shook her head firmly. "No, faith is not about what others think. It's about what feels true in your heart. And this is my truth." Hannah nodded in agreement. "It's hard," she admitted, "but nothing worth having comes easy. We've chosen this path, and we must walk it, no matter what." Their words carried the weight of their conviction. Despite the challenges, they found solace in their shared faith, in the strength it gave them. Together they began to navigate the complexities of their new reality, their bond as sisters, and now as fellow believers. Growing stronger with each passing day, By the end of the week, the media frenzy began to fade, but the ripples of their decision continued to spread. In quiet moments, Julia would open her Quran and find solace in its verses. Hannah found herself drawn to prayer, while Leah delved deeper into Islamic teachings. Each of them, in their own way, began to build a new life rooted in their faith. The announcement of their conversion had been the first step in a long and arduous journey. But as they faced the uncertain road ahead, they did so with the unshakable belief that they were walking the path of truth. The aftermath of Julia and Hannah's declaration was nothing short of devastating. Their father, unyielding in his rage, made good on his threat. "You are no longer my daughters," he had said, his voice cold as winter's frost. True to his word, he ordered them to leave the family home immediately, their ties to the household severed as though they had never existed. The two sisters packed their belongings in silence, the gravity of their decision weighing heavily on their hearts. Hannah's hands trembled as she folded her clothes, while Julia's expression remained stoic. It wasn't fear that consumed them. It was grief, a quiet mourning for the family they were leaving behind. Leah, Julia's closest friend, joined them in their exile. She too had accepted Islam, inspired by the courage of her friends and the conviction they displayed. Together, the three young women stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the only lives they had ever known. The first night in their rented flat was stark and unwelcoming. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, and the chill of the Danish winter seeped through the thin windows. Yet, despite their meager surroundings, the sisters and Leah found solace in their faith. They prayed together, their voices soft but resolute, finding comfort in the rhythmic verses of the Quran. The days that followed were a test of their resilience. Without financial support from their families, the trio struggled to make ends meet. Julia took on part-time work at a local bakery, rising before dawn to knead dough and bake bread. Hannah found work cleaning offices, while Leah took up babysitting to contribute to their shared expenses. Despite their efforts, there were nights when they had to choose between paying rent and buying food. Hunger became a familiar companion, but it never broke their spirit. One evening, as they shared a simple meal of bread and soup, there was a knock at the door. A reporter from a local news channel stood on their doorstep, microphone in hand. The story of their conversion had captured public attention, and the media was eager to uncover the motivations behind their controversial decision. "Why did you convert to Islam?" the reporter asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Was it because of a Muslim friend, or perhaps a relationship with a Muslim man? Surely there must be someone who influenced you." Julia's eyes flashed with determination as she responded. "No one influenced us," she said firmly. "Our decision to embrace Islam was entirely our own. It came from a place of reflection and understanding, not external pressure." The reporter raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Then what led you to this path?" she pressed. Taking a deep breath, Julia began to explain. "A few months ago, Denmark was gripped by protests against Muslims. The rhetoric was filled with hate, and the goal was to expel Muslims from our country, to erase their presence. I was among those protesting against them. I believed what I had been taught my whole life, that Muslims were a threat, that their faith was incompatible with ours." Hannah and Leah nodded silently, their faces reflecting the weight of their shared experiences. Julia continued, her voice growing steadier. "But as the protests grew louder, so did the resistance from the Muslim community. They refused to back down, even in the face of hatred. I couldn't understand it at first. What gave them such strength, such unshakable belief?" The reporter leaned in, intrigued. "And that's when you decided to explore Islam?" Julia nodded. "Yes, I started reading the Quran, not to understand it, but to find flaws in it, to prove to myself that my prejudices were justified. But the more I read, the more I realized how wrong I had been. The Quran wasn't just a religious text. It was a guide to life, filled with wisdom and compassion. It spoke to my heart in a way I had never experienced before." Leah chimed in, her voice soft but firm. "It wasn't an easy journey. We had to confront everything we had been taught to believe, to question the very foundation of our upbringing. But in the end, the truth was undeniable. Islam gave us peace, clarity, and purpose." The reporter's pen hovered over her notepad, her gaze steady on Julia. "And how did your families react?" she asked, leaning closer. The weight of the question hung in the air. And Julia took a moment to collect her thoughts. "It's not something we can summarize easily," Julia began, her voice tinged with both sorrow and resolve. "But our families, they made their stance clear. And we made ours. Before the reporter could ask her next question, Julia's gaze softened and her words began to slow, signaling that her explanation was far from over. The interview for now was only just beginning. The camera zoomed in on Julia's face as she adjusted her scarf, her expression a mix of resolve and vulnerability. The reporter leaned forward, sensing that Julia's story held depths yet to be uncovered. Julia took a deep breath and began. I grew up in a Jewish household where religion wasn't just a belief system, it was our identity, she started. From a young age, I was taught to see Muslims as a threat. They were portrayed as violent, oppressive, and backward, everything we were not. It was drilled into me through stories, sermons, and the conversations that surrounded me. She paused, her gaze distant. But my rebellion started early. By the time I was a teenager, I'd begun rejecting every value my family tried to instill in me. I immersed myself in a world of parties, superficial relationships, and distractions. Drugs became my escape. I dressed to attract attention, thinking it would make me feel powerful. Instead, it left me hollow. Hannah, seated beside her, added softly, "We both lived that way for years. It felt liberating at first, but it was a trap. The more we chased validation, the emptier we felt." Julia nodded. Then came the protests. Denmark erupted after an incident involving the desecration of the Quran. The Muslim community was outraged and they flooded the streets in protest. I was furious. How dare they disrupt our lives for their beliefs? Their actions made me miss an important exam, and that anger consumed me. Her expression darkened as she recounted what followed. I joined the counter-protests, determined to silence them. I shouted slogans, waved signs, and felt justified in my hatred. But as I stood there, yelling insults, something strange began to happen. The Muslims across from me, they didn't respond with the same venom. They didn't fight back. Instead, they stood firm, their determination unshakable. It wasn't defiance, it was conviction. And that unnerved me. The reporter interjected, "Was that the moment you started questioning your beliefs?" Julia hesitated before answering. "Not quite. It planted a seed, but I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. What really shook me happened a few days later. I overheard a conversation between two Muslim women at a coffee shop. One of them was describing how, despite the protests, she would pray for those who hated her. She said, 'Hate only harms the one who holds it. I pray that their hearts find peace.'" The room fell silent as Julia's voice wavered with emotion. I couldn't get her words out of my mind. Who prays for their enemies? What kind of faith inspires that kind of strength? Hannah continued the story. "We decided to read the Quran. At first it was out of arrogance. We wanted to confirm our beliefs, to find flaws that justified our anger. But the more we read, the more those walls started to crumble." Julia's voice grew steadier. The Quran wasn't just a religious text. It was profound, logical, and deeply compassionate. It addressed questions I didn't even know I had. It challenged me, not with anger or fear, but with wisdom. I remember reading a verse that said, "And we have certainly made the Quran easy for remembrance. So is there anyone who will remember?" It was as if it was speaking directly to me. The reporter leaned forward. "Can you share a specific moment that changed everything for you?" Julia's eyes glistened with tears. "Yes. One night I was sitting alone, overwhelmed by everything I was learning. I asked myself if I had the courage to truly follow my heart. At that moment, I opened the Quran to a random page, and the first verse I saw said, 'Indeed, those who have believed, and whose hearts are assured by the remembrance of Allah.' Unquestionably, by the remembrance of Allah, hearts are assured. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted." Leah, their close friend who had also converted, added her perspective. "For me, it was when I realized that Islam wasn't just about belief. It was about action, accountability, and purpose. It gave me clarity and direction. I'd never felt that before." The room seemed to hold its breath as the three women shared their journey. The reporter's pen hovered over her notepad. "How did your family react when they found out about your conversion?" Julia's expression darkened. "They were devastated. My father felt betrayed, my mother was heartbroken, and my community saw it as a rejection of everything we stood for. But it wasn't about rejecting them, it was about embracing the truth I had found." Hannah placed a hand on Julia's arm. "We never wanted to hurt them, but we couldn't ignore what we discovered. Islam wasn't just a religion, it was a lifeline, a source of hope and purpose." The tension in the room was palpable as Julia continued. "The hardest part was knowing that my decision meant losing the people I loved most. But I realized that to truly live, I had to be honest with myself. And Islam gave me the courage to do that. The reporter's voice was tinged with admiration. Your story is remarkable. What would you say to others who might be questioning their own beliefs? Julia smiled faintly. I'd say this. Don't be afraid to question. Don't be afraid to seek the truth, even if it takes you to places you never expected. Faith isn't about following blindly. It's about understanding. For me, that truth was Islam. For others, it might be different. But the courage to seek, that's what matters most. The camera lingered on Julia as she finished. The atmosphere in the rooms crackled with the weight of her words. The interview was far from over, and the story had only just begun. In Denmark, where our Jewish community thrived in isolation, the idea of a Muslim presence was virtually non-existent. There were no mosques in our town, no Muslim neighbors, and certainly no interactions with anyone from that faith. Islam was a distant concept, something we only knew about through biased narratives and secondhand stories. No one in our community had ever encountered a Muslim personally, let alone been invited to learn about their faith. For the three of us, my sister Hannah, our close friend Leah, and myself, the journey to Islam began in the most unexpected way, through the internet. In an age where every piece of information is just a click away, we found ourselves curious. The events surrounding the protests and the resilience of the Muslim community had planted a seed of doubt in what we had always believed. What was it about this faith that gave its followers such strength and conviction? We started small, reading articles and watching videos. The more we explored, the more we realized how little we actually knew. We found Islamic books online, downloaded translations of the Quran, and began studying with an open mind. It was as though a window had been opened, letting in light where there had only been darkness before. At first, we approached it critically. We compared Islamic teachings to what we had been taught in Judaism, looking for contradictions or flaws. But the more we read, the more Islam began to resonate with us. The Quran's messages of unity, compassion, and accountability struck a chord deep within. It wasn't just a religion, it was a complete way of life, one that provided clarity and purpose. One night, as the three of us sat huddled in my room, we discussed our findings. Do you feel it too? Leah asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. That pull, like something is calling us? Hannah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It feels like my heart is finally at peace, she said. But it's terrifying. What will our families say? Our community? Can we really do this? I looked at them both, my own heart pounding with a mixture of fear and certainty. I don't know what the future holds, I admitted. But I know one thing. I can't go back. Not after this. I believe in Allah. I believe this is the truth. It was a decision that changed everything. The next day, we quietly declared our faith. No one in our community knew, but we felt the weight of our decision in every aspect of our lives. We stopped participating in rituals we no longer believed in, distanced ourselves from practices that contradicted Islamic teachings, and began adapting to our new faith. It wasn't easy. Letting go of old habits and relationships felt like shedding layers of ourselves. But we knew it was necessary. The first visible change was in how we dressed. Wearing modest clothing and donning the hijab was a significant step, one that couldn't be hidden. It wasn't just about appearance. It was a reflection of our inner transformation. Our community noticed immediately, and the questions began. Why are you dressing like that? Have you joined some kind of cult? The whispers turned into confrontations, and soon our families were forced to confront the truth. When we finally told them, the backlash was immediate and severe. You've been brainwashed, my father shouted, his face red with anger. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're throwing away everything we've built, everything we stand for. My mother's reaction was quieter, but no less devastating. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, How could you do this to us? To our family? Don't you see how much pain you're causing? Hannah tried to explain, her voice trembling. This isn't about rejecting you. It's about embracing what we believe to be the truth. We still love you. We're still your daughters. But our words fell on deaf ears. The more we tried to explain, the more they saw our faith as a betrayal. Eventually, we were given an ultimatum. Abandon Islam or leave the house. It was the hardest decision we had ever faced, but we knew we couldn't turn back. With heavy hearts, we packed our belongings and left. Starting over was a struggle. We moved into a small flat on the outskirts of town, pooling our savings to pay the rent. It was far from comfortable. The furniture was secondhand and the walls were bare. But it was ours. We found work where we could, juggling part-time jobs to make ends meet. Some nights we went to bed hungry, but our faith gave us strength. Each prayer, each verse of the Quran we recited, reminded us why we had chosen this path. Our families didn't take our departure lightly. My father, in particular, was determined to bring us back, not out of love, but out of a need to restore his pride. He threatened legal action, spread rumors about us in the community, and even showed up unannounced at our flat, demanding we return home. Each encounter was more painful than the last, but we stood firm. Our small flat on the outskirts of town had become our refuge. Though it was modest, it was a space where we could live freely and practice our faith without fear. We worked tirelessly, balancing part-time jobs just to make ends meet. Each day was a test of our resilience, but our faith kept us strong. The Quran, our prayers, and our unwavering belief in Allah gave us solace in ways we couldn't have imagined. One cold winter night, as we sat together reviewing our plans for the next day, a loud, forceful banging on the door startled us. The sound echoed through the room, sending chills down our spines. Hannah's face turned pale and Leah clutched her scarf tightly. We exchanged nervous glances, none of us willing to move. "Open the door!" a familiar voice roared. It was my father. I hesitated for a moment before standing up. The banging grew louder, more insistent. Before I could unlock it, the door burst open and my father stormed in, followed by several male relatives. Their expressions were a mixture of anger and something darker, a resolve to force their will upon us. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling but firm. My father ignored my words. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted, his voice booming. "You've brought shame upon this family. Tonight we end this. You will return to Judaism, or we will make sure you regret every moment of your betrayal." The men spread out across the small flat, their presence overwhelming in the confined space. One of them tipped over a chair, and another grabbed a stack of books, hurling them to the ground. Our Quran fell open, its pages fluttering as if calling for protection. Hannah instinctively rushed to pick it up, cradling it in her arms as though shielding it from harm. One of the men advanced toward her. "Put that down," he barked, his hand raised as if to strike her. Hannah didn't flinch. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I will not let you take this from me. This is the word of Allah, and I believe in it with all my heart." Her defiance seemed to infuriate them further. They turned their anger toward all three of us, shouting and hurling insults. One man grabbed my arm roughly, while another pushed Leah to the ground. The violence escalated quickly, and soon blows rained down on us. We tried to defend ourselves, but we were outnumbered and overpowered. Amidst the chaos, I cried out, "You can beat us, hurt us, even kill us, but we will not abandon our faith. We believe in one God, and nothing you do can change that." My words echoed in the room, silencing the commotion for a brief moment. The men hesitated, their anger momentarily replaced by something else, doubt or perhaps fear. My father stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "You think your God will save you?" he sneered. "You're nothing but foolish girls chasing lies." Just as he raised his hand to strike me, something incredible happened. A strong gust of wind blew through the room, even though the windows were closed. It was sudden, powerful, and unexplainable. The Quran in Hannah's hands glowed faintly in the dim light, its open pages seeming to pulse with life. The men froze, their expressions shifting from anger to bewilderment. One of the men muttered, "What is this?" stepping back as though he had seen a ghost. Another clutched his chest, his face pale. My father's hand, still raised, dropped to his side as he stared at the Quran with wide eyes. Hannah, still holding the holy book, looked up at them. Her voice was calm, but filled with an unshakable conviction. "This is the power of Allah," she said. "You think you can harm us, but our faith protects us. No one can stand against the truth." The room was filled with a heavy silence. The men who had been so full of rage now looked uncertain, even frightened. My father took a step back, his lips moving as though trying to form words but failing. Finally, he turned to the others and said, "Let's go." One by one, they filed out of the flat, their anger replaced by a quiet, uneasy submission. My father was the last to leave, his gaze lingering on us for a moment before he walked out the door, shutting it behind him. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room broke, and we collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down our faces. "Did that really just happen?" Leah whispered, her voice trembling. Hannah nodded, her hands still clutching the Quran. "It wasn't us," she said softly. "It was Allah. He showed them his power. He protected us. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread within our community. Though our families never spoke of it directly, their attitudes toward us began to shift. The men who had barged into our flat seemed to avoid us entirely, as though they couldn't bear to face what they had witnessed. My father, once so determined to force us back, stopped his efforts entirely. It was as if he had come to terms with something he couldn't explain. Today, the three of us are living lives filled with peace and purpose. We've each married Muslim men who share our values and support our journey. Our days are filled with prayer, study, and gratitude for the blessings we've been given. Hannah and I are working toward memorizing the Quran, while Leah dedicates her time to community service, helping others find their path. We often reflect on that night, on the miracle that saved us and reaffirmed our faith. It was a reminder that Allah's power is infinite and that those who stand firm in their belief will always find His protection. Our journey has not been easy, but it has been worth every struggle. As I conclude my story, I offer this prayer. May Allah guide all those who are lost, soften the hearts of those who harbor hatred, and bring light to those who seek the truth. Ameen.